أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هل يستوي الأعمى والبصير أفلا تتفكرون صدق الله العلي العظيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته Jum'ah Mubarak. For some weeks we've been discussing the hikam, the wisdoms of Luqman al-Hakim, particularly as it relates to Tarbiyat al-Islamiyya, Islamic education, Islamic rearing, Islamic development. And these wisdoms that we have shared from Luqman are things, as we said, that as parents, as elders of our community, we want to instill them in the next generation. But likewise, we ourselves should bear these qualities, we should have these qualities and be an example, not simply we're instilling these in our next generation simply by telling them, but also by showing them as well. Because these wisdoms, which we apply at that third level of Tarbiyat al-Islamiyya, is that which the youth will carry with them for the rest of their lives. Those wisdoms, those pearls of wisdoms, those lessons that, inshallah, we should have learned, and we also carry with us for the rest of our lives. And I begin this particular group of pearls of wisdoms from Luqman with a question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands the Prophet to ask the Ummah. And this is in Surah Al-An'am, the 6th chapter of the Quran, verse 50, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, it says, Qul, says, say. He's commanding the Prophet to ask the Ummah, Hal yastawi al-a'ma wal-basir. Does the one who has sight and foresight, insight, are they equal to that individual who is a'ma, who is blind? So is the seeing, the same as the one who is blind. And this is not referring to someone who can see with the physical eye, but this basira that is mentioned here and the blindness that is mentioned here is with regards to iman, with regards to faith and understanding in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding in the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that program that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put forth to us, that program of life, how to live, how to interact with others, how to go about our daily lives, that he revealed in the Quran. And he showed us through the example of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wasalam. So the Prophet was commanded to ask us, are these two individuals the same? Afala tatafakkarun? Do you not reflect? Do you not think about those who have this basira, who have this insight, and they live their lives based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed, based on the example that is in the Prophet of Allah and his Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wasalam? With this understanding, we see that as Luqman, he mentioned to his son that the believer, he says, absarul aqiba. So, inna al-mu'mina absar al-aqiba, fa'amina nadama. So he says that the person who's a mu'min, he has foresight with regards to the aqiba, with regards to his end. In other words, whatever the mu'min does, they weigh their options. And we have many choices to make in life, many things that are before us. But the mu'min, when they make that choice, they weigh that choice based on the end result of that choice. And the one who, this is a beautiful word that Luqman uses. He says, absara al-aqiba. Absara means to be, it's a superlative, meaning that a person, the mu'min has a superlative level of insight. Because quite often when you ask someone to weigh, okay, well, what are the consequences of your actions? That if you go down this path, or if you do this job versus that job, again, their foresight and insight is based on, oh, well, what are my benefits that I get? What type of insurance do I have? What type of, and it's all related to this world. Whereas the mu'min, his foresight is superlative, meaning that yes, he looks at what the gain is in this world. But what's more important as well is what is the gain in the akhirah, or the loss in the akhirah. This is the foresight that the believer has. This is the foresight which, again, is based on what the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was to pose that question to the ummah. Again, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to pose this question as a verse, that part that I recited is just the latter part of verse 50 of Surah An'am, chapter 6. The Prophet Allah, he says, in attabi'u illa ma yuha ilayya. So he says that what I follow is only what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to you. Again, so the choices also that the believer makes is also based on, well, what has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed? What was that example in the Rasulullah? What was the example in the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdal salatu wasalam? What are those things which are halal, which are haram? And by no means think that this means that, oh, well, we have to give up our dunya. No. Among those pearls of wisdom is what Luqman, he told his son. He says, Ya bunay usika bi-ithnain. Ma tazalu bi-khayrin ma tamassakta bihima. He says, I advise you for two things. He says, and as long as you hold fast to these two things, he says, then you will be in a good state. You will be in a good state. You won't have that nidama, you won't have that worry. And so what are these two things that Luqman, he's advising his son for? He says, dirhamuka li ma'ashik, wa dinuka li ma'adik. He says, have dirham, money. In other words, earn a livelihood. And if you are earning your livelihood, then you won't have much to earn. But at the same time, also pay attention to your deen. So as Luqman says, if you hold these two things in your life and how you live, he says, then you'll be okay. You'll be in khair. But yes, if one of these two you are neglecting, then yes, you're going to be at a loss. You're going to be uneasy. And this is, yes, of course, this goes without doubt that, yes, our rizq, as many of the ulama, they say that our rizq is determined, that our rizq is there. We may not have a job that we are making 6 figures, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, He will give us what we need. And if everyone is fulfilling their responsibility and duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then even if we're earning less and we need more, then this is what zakat and khums and sadaqah is for, that we will qualify for those things. This system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He put forth, that if humanity followed it, then you wouldn't find poverty, utter poverty among people, where some people, they don't even know where they're going to eat tomorrow, or if they will have a meal tomorrow. They don't even know whether they will have shelter to sleep under. But the absence of that system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put forth, it is what creates this imbalance in the world, this inequality, where you have what I would say utter poverty, utter poverty. Doesn't mean that, again, someone being poor, that they won't be able to take care of themselves, but utter poverty where a person absolutely has no idea. Simply because they're not earning, and simply also because people are not fulfilling their responsibility towards zakat and khums and sadaqah, whereby there's some sort of safety net for such individuals. In either case, as Luqman, he is telling his son, he's advising him to hold fast to these two things. So yes, take from your dunya and also take from the akhirah. Exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts in the Quran, what the believer prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. خَيْرُ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ, to have good in this world and have good in the next. That thought also completely coincides with the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salam. One of the narrations as associated with Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi afdalus salam, when he states that individual, again, who follows that path, who follows the path of Rasulullah and his Ahlul Bayt, says they do not neglect their dunya for their deen, or their deen for their dunya. Again, they coincide. That when you're earning a livelihood, and I've mentioned this several times, that in itself is also a type of ibadah. To earn a livelihood, to take care of oneself, to take care of one's family, to earn a livelihood in order to give sadaqah, to help those who are less fortunate than themselves. All of this is ibadah. But we have to understand it and perceive it as ibadah. And understanding that as well, Luqman, he gives a very beautiful parable with regards to a deen and dunya, so that we will understand how these two things, they work together. So he tells his son that مثل الدين كمثل الشجرة الثابتة. He says that deen, our faith, our iman, our way of life, he says it is like a firmly planted tree. And the shajara thabita, that shajara thabita also comes in the Quran. What is the shajara thabita? That shajara thabita is one that is firmly planted and it will weather the storm. Meaning that no light wind will come and knock it over, but whatever storm comes, and we see this sometimes, you see these hurricanes coming and they have 100-mile-per-hour winds, but some trees, yeah, they flex, but they do not fall down. They do not break. So our deen is like that, or should be like that shajaratun thabita. It should be like that firmly planted tree. فَالْإِيمَانُ بِاللَّهِ مَاؤُهَا. And belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the water that nourishes this tree. And this tells us one thing about Iman. And quite often many people think that, well, oh yes, my Iman is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And then Aliyun waliyullah. That this is our Iman, and that's it. But we don't increase our Iman through diving deeper into the meaning of what is actually La ilaha illallah. What does it mean that I'm giving this testimony, this shahada? La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That I'm bearing witness that after Rasulullah, Aliyun waliyullah, that Ali is the wali of Allah. What does it mean? Because a shajara, a tree, as Luqman is given this parable, it is watered, or it gets its nourishment through Iman. So you can't water that tree once, right? It won't grow. And it will not remain firm if you only water it once. You think, oh, I did classes when I was coming up in madrasa, that's fine. But we do nothing to fortify our Iman, to increase our Iman. And we understand from the riwayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salam that al-Iman ala darajat, that there are levels of Iman. So as there's levels of Iman, this tree of our faith in this parable, that it needs water. It needs different levels and degrees of water. We need to increase the water in order to make that tree more firm in its position. وَصَلَاتُ عُرُوقَهَا. And the salat are the roots of that tree. Again, the roots of that tree, what happens in a tree? The roots absorbs the water. Does it not? So again, that means that if we are increasing our Iman, one measure to see that, oh, well, how well is my Iman growing? Again, look at your salat. How much of that Iman have you absorbed in your salat? That when you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you say Allahu Akbar, your focus is only on Allahu Akbar. The most famous example of that when Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, he was shot in the leg with an arrow. And then when the believers, they wanted to take this arrow out, it was too painful. That's Imam Ali, he said, no, this, the pain is excruciating. So the Prophet, he told him, he says, leave him. Wait until he goes to pray. He says, when he makes the salat, he says, then you pull the arrow out. This is because when he makes that takbir, nothing else is important. Everything else he forgets. So even the pain of the arrow being pulled out of his life, he wouldn't feel it. It's forgotten. So how much is our salat absorbing that Iman, that which we are watering our deen with? This is a question that we need to pose to ourselves. وَزَكَاتُ جَذْعُهَا. And the trunk of that tree is the zakat. Those alms that we give, of course, our zakat, our that again strengthens that tree. And quite often, a tree that is firmly planted usually is one that has some width to it. So what is the width of our tree? That's how much are we helping others? This is the purpose of our zakat. وَتَآخِي فِي اللَّهِ شُعَبُهَا. And brotherhood for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are the branches of that tree. And the purpose of branches, it will extend that tree out. It also helps that tree in many different ways. So how is our network of brotherhood, our strength of brotherhood? وَالْأَخْلَاقُ الْحَسَنَةُ وَرَقُهَا. And good manners are the leaves of that tree, and which helps that tree process the water, the nourishment that it's getting. It brings in and soaks in the sun, helps that photosynthesis. So, and of course, those leaves are on the branches as well. وَلَخُرُوجُ عَنْ مَعَاصِ اللَّهِ ثَمَرُهَا. And one of the most important parts of that tree is strong, is firm. It has life if it has those green leaves on it. But what's more important, as Luqman, he tells his son, are the fruits of that tree. What type of fruits is this tree bearing? And he says, خُرُوجْ عَنْ مَعَاصِ اللَّهِ ثَمَرُهَا. The fruits that it should bear, and that fruits of that shajaratu thabita is coming out of the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the fruit. This is the fruit that you want from that tree. وَلَا تَكْمُلُ الشَّجَرَةُ إِلَّا بِثَمَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ. And that tree does not become complete or whole or a very good tree unless it bears the best of fruits, which is to abstain from disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, كَذَلِكَ الدِّينُ لَا يَكْمُلُ إِلَّا بِالْخُرُوجِ عَنِ الْمُحَارَمِ. He says, and likewise, that our deen is not complete until we come out of the state of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how Luqman tells his son about deen. One of those two things that he should have. And the other is a dirham, an income, wealth, which is very clear and evident. This is part of dunya. And he tells the son, Ya bunay, inna dunya bahrun amiq, qad halaka fiha alimun kathira. He says, and the dunya is a deep and vast ocean that has drowned many generations. And one version of this says jil. This is why I'm translating alimun kathir. That yes, this dunya, a vast ocean, has drowned many nations, drowned many generations. He says, in order to not be drowned, he says, فَجْعَلْ سَفِينَتَكَ فِيهَا الْإِيمَانِ. He says, and if you don't want to be drowned in that ocean, he says, make your ship, we need to have a ship. He says, make your ship your iman. And just as a kind of aside here, a very interesting point that, again, if you look at back in the days, ships were made out of what? Out of wood, out of trees. So I thought that's a kind of nice parallel. So your deen is like that shajaratun thabita. In order to navigate the dunya, you need a ship. Quite often the ships was also made of wood. And some traditions, and just some aside knowledge, in Viking tradition, you had this one person or a group of people who they were expert boat makers. And they often lived in the woods, among the trees. And in according to their legends, these people, they would talk to the trees. And they would know, you cut this tree because it's ready. This is going to make a strong boat. Leave this tree, it's not going to make it strong. Even though both of them may have been big and wide. So no, this is a tree that's going to make a good boat. That one's not. So in order to navigate this dunya, you need a ship. And that ship should be your iman, as it states, وَجَعَلُ شِرَاءَهَا التَّوَكُّلِ. And its path should be based on reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَجَعَلُ زَادَكَ فِيهَا تَقْوَى اللَّهِ. And your provision upon that ship should be God consciousness. تَقْوَى اللَّهِ. وَجَعَلْ فَإِنْ نَجَوْتَ فَبِرَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. And if you survive, if you're successful, your ship does not sink, it's because of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in other words, yes, we make our effort and we do whatever we can. We continue to build our iman, strengthen our iman, but also ask for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help in that way. Because it will come with Allah's help. We cannot do it without Allah. We make our effort, but then we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help in strengthening our iman. It says, وَإِنْ حَلَقْتَ فَبِذُنُوبِكَ. And if you sink, it says it's because of your disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He instills within us and He allows us to live by these pearls of wisdom. And yes, we have the best of this world, khairul dunya and khairul akhirah. But as we navigate our life through this world, we make our choices, that we be among those who are absarul aqibah, those believers who their foresight and their insight is superlative. That we're not simply looking at what gain we will have in this world, and we're neglectful for what our gain or loss in the hereafter will be from our choices in this world. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين الرسول المصدد المصطفى الأمجد أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أوصيائه وأولياء الله أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب والحسن بن علي والحسين بن علي وعلي بن حسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المنتظر المهدي. عجل الله تعالى فرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. First and foremost, I advise myself for taqwallah, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every action, and I advise each of you for taqwallah, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every action. As we mentioned before and time again, part of that taqwallah, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to be aware of what is going on around us, to be aware of the state of the ummah, to be aware of the state of the world. And as we ended the blessed month of Ramadan with the International Day of Quds, and of course all of the atrocities that were happening in Palestine, the killings, the murder of innocent individuals. And among those individuals were children, many children. And if you look at the images, it was clear, very clear. So clear that many nations and people who refused to speak up before, they began to speak up. They began to speak out. Because atrocities were, again, devastating. The, you could say, balance of powers did not exist. There was no balance of power. And the rhetoric was pretty much still the same in the media, that there's a right of defense, but there was no defense, but rather there was a massacre of one side. Even as we speak, the UN is also, they have international probe to look into the human rights violations in Gaza, to look into them. What the results would be, Allahu A'lam, Allah knows best. But nonetheless, this is a good step, but not the final step, which means we still have to be diligent about what is happening. We have to follow up. And more importantly as well, we have to understand the rhetoric. And not only understand the rhetoric, but to make others aware of the rhetoric that is being used. Because if that rhetoric is not challenged or offset, yes, people begin to buy into that rhetoric and say, oh, well, yes, this is okay. Or, well, the Palestinians, as we mentioned last week, they're being evicted. Eviction has a very specific term, that if you're living in your home and you have a right to live in your home, you have not violated any law, there's no eviction. So one of these ways, in order to kind of also make ourselves aware of the rhetoric, but also make others aware of the rhetoric as well, there's a very beautiful debate that was sent to me actually this morning. And I took time to watch this debate, and I would advise each of you to also watch the debate. It's 1 hour and some change, but it was well worth the 1 hour. Quite often in our busy lives, we're like, oh, just give me a 5-minute video on this or a 5-minute video on that. But with this debate, it is worth the 1 hour and few extra minutes that it takes to listen to it, or to watch it if you want to watch it, or put it on, listen to it. The name of the debate is, and it's on YouTube, so you can YouTube it. It's called Debate, and then has semicolon, Anti-Zionism is Anti-Semitism. So what the debate is about, that if you are opposed to the political massacre, the state of Israel, their massacre of the Palestinians. It says, well, if you're saying that you're opposed to that, you're being anti-Semitic, meaning that you're hating Jews themselves. So the debate is to figure out that, hey, are these two things equivalent or not? Is it possible for me to be a person who, yes, I have no problem with a Jewish person who's Jewish person practicing their religion, and they have a sense of humanity. They are following the divine revelations that they have been given. And among those 10 commandments that they have been given, thou shalt not kill. One should not kill anyone without any purpose, senselessly. That's one of the 10 commandments. So if a Jew is following that guidance that they have been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through their prophets, because I'm against what is happening in Israel, does that make me anti-Semitic or not? And there's been a debate that's been going on. In fact, this debate was 1 year ago, but now we are also seeing, I think, some of the fruits of that. Because of course, the people who are voting there, and there was a vote that was taken to see that what the results were, at least in that debate hall. One vote before people went in, and then one vote after the debate. Very interesting. Worth watching. Not only just for that, but just to understand what are the arguments. What are the arguments? Part of it is because, oh, if you are involved in the divestment movement, they say, okay, I'm going to boycott any products that are from this, then are you anti-Semitic? Those who are in favor of this particular notion that, yes, being anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic, they say, yes, even that is being anti-Semitic. Because you don't want to buy anything that is coming from Israel or developed in Israel. But very good debate. I'll leave it at that, so that you guys will go and look at it. You would take that 1 hour. Like I said, it's very well worth it to understand the rhetoric, to understand it. Because we may be asked that question as well. That, oh, if you're opposed to this, then you're anti-Semitic. What is our response? And you have, again, the two sides. The side that argues that, no, being anti-Zionist is not anti-Semitic. No, I have no problem with Jews, but I have a problem with the political machine that is biased, that is discriminatory, that is, again, taking the lives of individuals. Just like saying, oh, well, hey, almost debate is, oh, are you anti-apartheid? If I'm anti-apartheid, does that mean that I'm anti-white or anti-Dutch? The Dutch, they colonized South Africa. Are they equivalent or not? But nonetheless, these are things that we need to be keen on, what is said and what is stated in the media, because quite often as Muslims, we are approached with those questions as well. And so we need to be astute, attentive, and very sharp in our understanding. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hastens the reappearance of Imam al-Zaman so that He may establish justice in this world as it has been filled with injustice. May He make us among His helpers, His companions, those who sacrifice their lives for Him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins, cover our shortcomings, to grant us our needs, to have mercy upon our deceased ones, to give cure to those who are ill among friends and family members, and those who are suffering in this current pandemic. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma ighfir dhunubana wastur uyubana waqdi hawaijana washfi maradana وارحم أمواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشرين بين يديه وتحت لواء بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلى الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل